How's it going, everyone? I'm Crysis, and I like movies. Like, a lot. And I've seen quite a few. Just last year, I saw 107 movies, 80 of which were in theaters. The rest were through streaming, both first and third party platforms, if you catch my drift. But I'm not here to talk about last year's movies. No, I'm here to talk about the movies I've seen this year, or at least back in January of this year. Starting off the month, I saw Better Man, the Robbie Williams biopic, and I have to say it wasn't terrible. I am a huge fan of biopics that don't shy away from how shitty of a person the subject of the movie is, and this movie did that surprisingly well. Instead of painting Robbie Williams as a saint who did nothing wrong and just had bad things happen to him, the movie showed how he was a prick to anyone and everyone, including his family, friends, and even the members of his boy band. The acting was great, the music was phenomenal, though I don't think it really sparked any kind of interest for me to listen to his music going forward. Still a solid pick if you've got, nothing better to do on a weekend. I do understand that it did not perform well at the box office, given that really no one outside of the UK and a few other places knew who he was, but that's neither here nor there. Personally, I'd give this an 8 out of 10. Up next was The Damned, which was just me trying to get through this movie. I don't want to rag on this too much, but it was just slow and predictable, which was kind of disappointing, honestly. The movie starts with an interesting enough premise, but the pacing and general storytelling structure needed a lot more time to make it truly work. The cast was fine, though there weren't any real standout performances from anyone, as everyone just said their lines with little to no emotion. The ending was nice, I guess, but it came too little too late, in my opinion. It also didn't help that two separate people interrupted the movie toward the end, but that's not the fault of the movie, just some stupid people that don't know proper theater etiquette. I'd be willing to give it another chance, but as of right now, it stands at a 5 out of 10. Next on the chopping block was The Last Showgirl, starring Pamela Anderson, Brenda Song, Kiernan Shipka, and Dave Bautista, but everyone was fairly forgettable in their roles, if I'm being honest. If you want a lesson in how to take an interesting story and tell it in the worst way possible, watch this movie. It follows the oldest member of the Last Showgirl act on the Vegas Strip, and the fallout that arises from the show shutting down, but everything is done so poorly. The acting felt phoned in, the camera work was just overall bad, the chemistry between most of the characters just didn't exist, and it felt like some characters were there just to be punching bags for the main character. The main thing that irked me, though, was the constant blur effect that was around seemingly every shot, which made the movie hard to watch at points. I will say, as with a few movies that I've seen so far, I may just not have been the target audience for this, which I fully accept, but it just didn't work for me, so it gets a 3 out of 10. After a bit of a break, aka 4 days, I saw Wolfman, the new pseudo werewolf movie for the year. While it wasn't as bad as the trailers would have you believe, it still isn't a great movie by any stretch of the imagination. Going less into werewolf territory and more into body horror slash suspense, it does tell the story of one man's turn from man into something else after getting infected by a creature of the forest. The effects of the scenes from the titular Wolfman's perspective were interesting, with a greater contrast being shown from what is seen from the humans' perspectives, especially with one later scene in a barn. The ending was a bit lackluster, but I left with the same thought I usually have at the end of a horror movie. These guys are going to need a lot of therapy, especially the child. It could have been better, it could have been a hell of a lot worse, so we're just going to have this sit at a happy 6.5 out of 10. Almost a week later, I followed the horror movie with a thriller in the form of Den of Thieves 2 Pantera. Having watched the first one the night prior, I was pleasantly surprised at the quality of the sequel compared to the first one. A fantastic continuation of the first movie, building on the lore of the two main characters, this movie really sets the scene for an impossible heist. Everything about the plan is amazing, and of course, you can't have a heist movie without something going wrong, but that just makes the tension that much better. Gerard Butler and O'Shea Jackson Jr. return and form a realistic, if strained, friendship throughout the course of the movie, culminating in a fantastic ending that leaves the story open for further sequels or a good ending to the series if so chosen. Is the premise dumb? Sure, but I'm not watching a heist movie looking for Casablanca level story. It was just plain great, and that's mostly what I go to the movies for, so it's going to come in at a 7 out of 10. Up next, the first in a series of 6 movies in 5 days, and the first movie doubleheader of the year, we have The Colors Within. And I'll admit this is a lot cuter than I thought it was going to be. The Colors Within was a fantastic story about a girl finding friends, even if it took a dodgeball to the face to gain the first one. The songs were gorgeous, the animation was beautiful, and the only downside was when it ended, honestly. It was just such a cute movie that I would want to watch it again, though maybe in English this time so I can appreciate the movie more than speed reading the subtitles and then looking up to see the scene's action. But that's more on me than it is on the movie, so I'm going to give this a 9.5, but that may change to a 10 at the end of the year, but we will have to see. The second movie of that first doubleheader was Flight Risk, starring Mark Wahlberg, Topher Grace, and Michelle Dockery. And honestly, it was better than it had any right to be, but that doesn't mean it was necessarily good. Mark Wahlberg is great as a creepy hitman going after Topher Grace, who plays the role of a nerdy fugitive quite well. I'm also a huge fan of movies that are set within a constrained time period in a secluded environment, so this movie was a great example of that. The acting itself was pretty okay, nothing really to write home about, and the movie plays well within the setting of a small cargo plane for the duration of the film. If not for the language, this would have most likely have been a PG-13 movie, even including one of the funniest villain deaths I've seen in a hot minute. If you know, you know, but that doesn't mean this movie is getting any higher than a 6 out of 10 from me. Movie 3 of this stretch was Presence, starring Lucy Liu, and unfortunately, having a good idea doesn't mean it should always hit the silver screen. The acting was fine, I guess, with no real standout performances. It was more the editing that I had an issue with. Each scene is one shot with fluid camera movement showing us what's happening from the perspective of the titular presence, but in between each scene, there's about a 1.5 to 2 seconds of just a black screen. The end of the movie kind of explains what these blank screens are supposed to be, but until then, it's just an annoying editing choice that feels like a mistake. It also tried really hard to misdirect the audience as to the identity of the presence, and it worked, I guess, but it was also trying too hard at times that it made the ending fairly predictable. It just didn't work for me, so it's going to get a soft landing in the middle, which is more than I can say for some of the characters in this movie, at a 4.5 out of 10. And then we had the worst movie of the month, Inheritance. If I can say one thing before getting to the actual review of this movie, ugh, just ugh. Inheritance is one of those movies where it'll probably be streaming 2 weeks after being released in theaters because absolutely no one saw it. This movie's only claim to fame is that it was filmed entirely on an iPhone, and you can tell because of the super intense close-up shots that plague the entirety of the movie, the shaky cam through the duration of every scene, even if the characters are standing still, and an ending that makes no goddamn sense. The acting was phoned in, no pun intended, the script was just all around bad, and I forgot most of the events of the movie 20 minutes after leaving the theater. It also has probably one of the worst, at least so far this year, instances of saying the title in the movie, and it's just so dumb, and I hate it. It's getting a 1.5. And while I hate repeating myself, just ugh. Finally, a doubleheader to end the month of January, starting with Companion, starring Jack Quaid and Sophie Thatcher. Another contained movie, both in time and setting, which is always going to put a smile on my face. The chemistry between the leads is relatively believable, which is mildly impressive. The acting was a little cheesy at times, and the dialogue felt off other times, but overall the story was great, and the humor was fantastic. One thing that I will say about this is that if you're going to see it, don't watch any of the trailers for it, or look at any of the posters. go in as blind as possible to be as surprised as you can be. It's a solid flick, though I would hesitate to call it a horror movie like AMC called it for the Scream Unseen that they did. Nothing against the movie there, it just is what it is. It's just not a horror movie. What it is, though, is a good movie, falling in at a respectable 7.5 out of 10. To cap off the doubleheader and the month, I ended up seeing Brave the Dark, a movie based on a true story with what felt like very few exaggerations or embellishments in order to sell a 3-act structure. It was honestly very depressing to watch a kid have to go through the things that he does in this movie, especially when you learn everything through the exposition dump toward the end. However, I really wish the actors brought the energy from the second half to the first half of the movie. The acting in the first half was subpar from almost everyone, feeling cheesy and like the director decided to use the first takes for every scene. But in the second half, when things start going downhill fast, everyone turns their acting skills up to 11. And I just wish that the movie had been consistent in quality. But other than that, it was a pretty decent movie, sitting at a 7 out of 10. In the month of January, I saw 11 movies for an average rating of 5.9. I walked into 2 of those showings not knowing what I was going to see, those being Better Man and Companion, and I only ended up paying $6 for tickets. God, I love AMC stubs. I'm not sponsored, but I wish I could be. As a brief reminder, here's all the movies I saw in order of their quality, at least in my opinion. Colors Within, Better Man, Companion, Den of Thieves, and Brave the Dark tied at 7. Wolfman, Flight Risk, The Damned, Presence, The Last Showgirl, and last and certainly least, at least for January, Inheritance. If you want me to give an in-depth, spoiler-full review of any of these movies, feel free to ask in the comments, and I can make a video on the individual movies that y'all want to hear my full opinion on. Anyway, I'll be doing a video like this next week for the month of February, where I saw 8 movies, so it might be a shorter video, depending on how much I talk. We'll see. For now, I'll see you in the next one, and maybe you'll see one of the movies that I saw. Happy viewing.